Dreamers Awake, Chapter 15. Aunt Maggie's brow furrowed as Lydia relayed all that had been happening to her since she moved in. Lydia felt her anxiety grow as she watched the furrows deepen on her aunt's forehead. What was she thinking? Was she thinking Lydia was crazy, driven insane by both her parents dying in such a short time frame? "Well," Maggie began, then stopped. "I suppose I haven't exactly been honest with you." She sighed heavily, and Lydia felt a small amount of relief. Aunt Maggie hadn't automatically thought of sending her along to a nut house. "I'm tired of all the secrets. I'm sick of not knowing what everyone is talking about around me. Something happened, something big, so just tell me," Lydia said. Aunt Maggie let out a loud puff of air. "I should." She paused. "Okay, well, it's not pretty, but here goes. Just promise you'll save questions and interruptions for the end," Lydia promised, and Aunt Maggie launched into one of the most dramatic stories she had ever heard. Aunt Maggie had met a man in college. His name was Roger Perkins. "That's my dad," Lydia thought briefly, but held her tongue and listened. Roger and Maggie fell in love over time, sharing classes and writing, spending hours together in the library. Eventually, Aunt Maggie became pregnant, so they decided to marry. They were on that track anyway, and Roger seemed so excited about being a father. It was the day of their wedding that Roger met Lori, Maggie's sister, Lydia's mother, for the first time. As much as he had been enamored with Maggie, he felt that tenfold with Lori. While Maggie was off taking care of some catering snafu or cake mistake, Roger met Lori in the bride's chambers and ended up, well, they began their affair. Lydia was silent. Her aunt's eyes remained dry throughout the story, but she'd stopped talking and swallowed hard several times. She cleared her throat and began the story again, picking up quickly and moving along. Roger and Lori kept their affair hidden until Maggie and Roger's daughter, Matilda, was born. It was soon after this that Lori became pregnant. "With me," Lydia thought to herself. She stared at her hands. Her aunt's voice had shifted from almost emotional to stony, not quite angry, but as if getting there would only take the tiniest nudge. Roger did what he believed was the honorable thing and came clear about the affair, how long it had been going on, and that his wife's sister was now pregnant with his child. "That same night, I packed up our little Tilda. She was only about 2 or 3 months old, and moved to Washington. It was a place I'd always wanted to go, and Roger had always said, 'Later, another time, now's not good.' I guess he didn't want to be too far from Lori," Aunt Maggie faltered. "I didn't want to make him choose, because I was terrified that he'd choose Lori and, well, you. So I took his choice away, or at least I made it easier for him." Her face was red with anger, her eyes shining with the age-old hurt of which she'd never really spoken. She swallowed hard and continued again. Matilda and Maggie lived happily in Seattle for years. "You know this part of the story," Aunt Maggie said, but continued anyway. When Matilda was 16, she was struck by a car and killed as she walked home from school. The driver was late, speeding too much down a steep hill with a blind curve. It was raining. They tried to stop, but the momentum and slick ground was too much for the car's balding tires. "It was right outside the house, that busy street. She was almost home. I was having a cup of tea, and I watched it happen." Aunt Maggie paused again. A single tear slid down her cheek, and she absently brushed it away as she had done 1,000, 1,000,000, 1,000,000,000,000 times before. Lydia felt a tight lump in her throat. For a moment she'd had a half-sister, and in the same moment she was gone. It was strange. She didn't know how to feel about it. She felt sad for Aunt Maggie, but what was her feeling on the whole story? She wasn't sure. The worst part was she didn't die right away. She was in a coma for a while in the hospital, the same room we were in today, actually. She did come out of it. I got to bring her home. She was recovering. She had her little spot downstairs where that chair and TV are. She'd play her video games, read, and do the homework her friends brought her. Aunt Maggie paused, clearing her throat, swallowing more tears. She was recovering, and then suddenly she wasn't. I went downstairs one morning expecting to see her in her chair, awake and watching YouTube or some other garbage, but she was motionless there. She just... Aunt Maggie cut off and wiped her eyes vigorously. Anyway, about a year later, give or take, I get a call from your mom, my sister. She's been diagnosed with breast cancer and wants to make amends. I was a little resistant at first, but Lori was my sister. We were so close. Not speaking to her for going on 17 years. Aunt Maggie sighed. I think you know the rest. Your dad, in his grief, drove his car off a bridge, and you ended up with me. Aunt Maggie finished. Lydia nodded. It was so much to take in. I don't think I can process all that, Lydia said softly. They had arrived at home about 10 minutes before, but Aunt Maggie had finished her story, and they were sitting in the driveway, the car turned off. It had been raining, so the windows were fogged up, and the car was beginning to feel stuffy, suffocating. I almost said no, Aunt Maggie said. What? Lydia asked. I almost said no to taking you. Tilda's death, it was the worst pain I'd ever experienced, including Roger and Lori's betrayal. I didn't know if I could open up again or if I should. Things had been happening in the house ever since Tilda died. I wondered if it would affect you. Aunt Maggie paused. I suppose it has. I thought it would be better if you were downstairs, though. Things were mostly happening in her room and around that TV setup. I thought if you were away from those areas, maybe you wouldn't notice. I guess it didn't work, Lydia said, not unkindly, just as a matter of fact. No, I guess not. Aunt Maggie paused. I'm sorry I wasn't honest with you. I should have told you something. Lydia shook her head. When was there time? There's never a good time. Lydia sounded aged beyond her 16 years. The two women got out of the car and made their way slowly to the front door. Aunt Maggie unlocked the doors and they went inside. Aunt Maggie went directly to her bedroom and closed the door. Lydia sat at the breakfast nook and thought about what she'd just learned. The story seemed plausible, she supposed. She had known since their shopping trip that Matilda was the ghost she'd been seeing, but the story still didn't explain her motivation or her malice. Was she worried Lydia would take her place? It was clear from the way Aunt Maggie spoke about her that that would never happen, not in a million years. The soft sobs from her aunt's bedroom should have been evidence to that. Furthermore, she didn't want Aunt Maggie to take her mom's place. She never could anyway. So what could Matilda want? Why was she tormenting her? Maybe she was worried that Lydia would replace her amongst her friends? Maybe Matilda was just a bully like Michelle and liked tormenting her, but that struck her as absolutely wrong. Just as certainly as she felt that it was definitely Matilda haunting her dreams, she also definitely knew she wasn't like Michelle at all. Maybe it was time to bring in more people who knew Matilda, people who knew her in a different way from her mom. It was time to tell her new friends what had been happening to her and hope they didn't think she was crazy. Maybe they could shed some light on what Matilda's ghost needed from her.